Good day, everyone. My name is Princess Jamila Serna. My female educator paper focuses on Dorothy Tabigechi Sunrise Laurentino. Dorothy Sunrise Laurentino was born in the Comanche Reservation in Oklahoma on May 7th, 1909, and died on August 4th, 2005 in Arkansas. She worked from 1933, immediately after acquiring her associate's degree, up until 1972, teaching special education to students with disabilities and those whose first language was not English. She dedicated most of her working career in various Native American reservations in Arizona, New Mexico, and in Oklahoma, including teaching at the public school system in Oregon during the years following both her acquisition of the bachelor's degree and her master's degree in education and special education from the Northeastern State Teachers College. Dorothy was a distinguished educator and the first Native American from the Comanche Nation to be recognized and inducted in the National Teachers Hall of Fame. She was the granddaughter of the last Comanche chief of the Comanche Nation before being forced to surrender to the United States, Chief Quanah Parker. When she was 6 years old, her parents wanted to have her attend a local public school due to the long distance and difficulties for the child to reach their school and the burden of not being close to her family. Instead of attending the only Indian boarding school called Fort Sill Indian School, where she was only allowed to attend by law. Indian boarding schools at that time were residential facilities where the child was fully removed from their families by distance and discipline and kept away from their customs. Dorothy only attended a few days at the local public schools before both the faculty and her local classmates accused her of bringing in diseases and demanded that she leave the school. Her parents turned around and filed a lawsuit demanding equal access to the same education promised to all Indian tribe members, which they won in 1918, forcing the school to revoke their policy of denying Native Americans access to public schools. According to Dorothy, she didn't speak English, and it was her mother who helped her navigate the school systems during the years she attended. It was very hard for her as the only Native American child, and even more difficult when her mother passed away just a few years later in 1920. This impacted her decision to become an educator, in addition to the reminder of how her case impacted many more students to follow. The case that her family won was so significant that it played a pivotal role that the language is used to challenge the Plessy versus Ferguson case, challenging the separate but equal doctrine, and ultimately finalized the case for Alice Piper versus the Pine School District, another Native American student fighting for equal access in the state of California. And even more directly impactful, the decision was part of the defense for establishing the right to citizenship by Native Americans in 1924, a right that was already established and given to former Black slaves, but not to Native Americans. And finally, the Brown versus the Board of Education case in 1954 contained most of the language in this case as well. After successfully graduating from the same public school system, she sued to access, following her older sister, Winona, who also became an educator. Dorothy continued her education at the Chilocco Indian Agriculture School, which was a vocational school, while one of her brothers, Morris Tabigechi, or Sunrise, became a code talker during World War II. Dorothy progressed through the system of adult education, earning an associate's, bachelor's, and master's degree in education and special education. Dorothy immediately began as a bilingual and special education educator as soon as she graduated with her associate's degree and moved through the higher education system, where she decided after many years of experience to ultimately acquire her master's degree in special education in the state of Oregon. It is no surprise to anyone that during the period when Dorothy was alive and active, she was experiencing ideas of colonization that began in Europe and were imported as part of the template for building this nation, including the education system. Two very distinct ideas that were later debunked as pseudosciences, phrenology and craniometry, were backbone of an idea known as eugenics, which fueled policies that label individuals with disabilities as defective or unfit based on physical characteristics. The Western expansion into native territory was justified by eradicating the Indian by U.S. Congress passing the Civilization Fund Act in the late 19th century, strictly to enforce what was known as the civilization process. And a lot of this justification came from the idea of eugenics. The IQ test, developed in the early 20th century and rooted in the same racist and ableist ideas as craniometry, were used to justify tracking students into different educational paths. And in the case of Black and Native American children, some were disproportionately classified as slow learners and denied access to higher education. So, just looking at the path that Dorothy took, it was impressive that she was even able to continue through the higher education process herself. Native Americans, just like African slaves and other immigrants during Dorothy's lifetime, were subject to these types of profiling. Where not only did they endure segregation based on these ideas, but also forced sterilization, and they were given a label based on race, resulting in deleterious laws such as the Virginia's Racial Integrity Act passed in 1924. One example of one of a very close case was in Massachusetts that justified the ability to expel students based on their lack of need for education based on what they consider to be disabled or weak. Considering the fact that Dorothy's great grandmother, Quanah Parker's mother, the Chief Quanah Parker, was a white woman who, at the age of 8 years old, was captured by the Comanches in 1836 and was integrated into the tribe after the Comanches raided Fort Parker that year. Claiming whiteness would have been the best in the path of least resistance for the Sunrise family to claim access to the white school system at the time that they fought that legal case and just access the privileges that came with race. But instead, they chose to go in the other direction. It was imperative to Dorothy's parents to keep her close to her family for the purpose of maintaining a close tie to her roots and her family. Something that, despite knowing that the education she would receive was to be one of a foreign culture, regardless, the family was determined to ensure that they survive as a Comanche people. If it wasn't for the success in the legal case, none of the changes to segregation in education would have been as successful or progressive for Native Americans as it was with the case where Dorothy was included. This is because of other programs that were meant to erase the identity of indigenous people, as incentivizing them to mix with white people, if not raise their existence during the fight for land, if they weren't already doing so, through something called the Pocahontas exception, which, quote, allowed any person with 1/16 or less of American Indian blood and none other Caucasian blood to identify as white. They could have gone in the direction if they wanted to, but of course they did not. We could look at the defeat of a family that was already subject of this new nation that was providing a service that was meant for all under the same government, to have the children subjected to an unequal and abusive school system through the boarding schools that they could not fight against. And all they were asking for was access to a school closer to the family, and they ended up having to fight in this case for equality. Instead, they were told that they belong in a segregated institution, the Indian boarding schools, where the young children had to walk so far away to attend this education that was supposed to be part of the civilization movement, which was simply failing to do so in its design, which is part of the language in the case. After retiring, Dorothy, as a child and young adult educator in 1972, she continued to serve as a substitute teacher. In some districts, I had in the same exact district that discriminated against, where she returned back to Oklahoma, but undertook what became one of the greatest contributions to adult education. One of the reasons why I wanted to focus on her. She innovated the first Comanche language program with the collaboration of her tribal members to establish what is today as the Comanche National Official Language School. With all of the experience and accreditations, Dorothy designed a program that integrated Native American traditions of teaching and learning that included songs, poetry, and dance, methods that have existed within the culture for thousands of years. Not only was the Comanche language safe from extinction, but a system of documentation and education was created under the guidance of Dorothy and her elders to preserve it as part of the Comanche Nation's services to the people that still stand today. which is the only cultural and community center found on the reservation, and was named after her for being the founder, the innovator, and the preserver of the language that they study today. In addition, Dorothy was also honored um, by the National Indian Association as the Elder of the Year in 1995 because of that. An award bearing her name was inaugurated by the Cache High School for American Indian students who exemplifies her principles and her legacy. And in 1997, she became the first Native American and first person from Oklahoma to be inducted in the National Teachers Hall of Fame. Despite the decades of success and forward movement towards a more equitable education system, we stand today more than a decade after Dorothy passed away, watching how, with the stroke of a pen, cut through executive orders are used to erase every single effort by people like Dorothy. Today, we're facing a crisis both in publicly and privately funded education that is narrowing the subjects and methods of education, which are hitting hard those that just 100 years ago were subject to denial to access to any form of learning at all. Without funding for instructional designs that considers how to include those types of learners labeled as different or disabled, will guarantee a complete erasure, if not disappearance, of the same tools we are today learning about in this very program, including the inability to discuss the historical context of programs that were used to discriminate and segregate the learner, such as the Comanche people where Dorothy Sunshine Laurentino belonged. Thank you for your time, and here are my references.